October 30th, 1501. Johannes Burchard, the Pope's Master of Ceremonies, opened his diary and wrote what he had just witnessed in the papal palace. He described it clinically, without moral judgment. 50 courtesans, completely naked, crawling among candlesticks, picking up chestnuts scattered on the floor. Pope Alexander VI watching from his chair. Cardinals placing bets, Cesare Borgia distributing prizes, and Lucrezia, the Pope's daughter, keeping score as men competed to have sex with the most women. Burchard recorded it all because it was his job to document papal events, and this was a papal event, hosted by the Vicar of Christ himself, attended by princes of the Church, refereed by the woman who was supposed to represent Christian virtue. This wasn't rumor, it was official Vatican record, written by a man who had no reason to lie and every reason to remain silent. Before we explore how the Pope's daughter became referee at Vatican orgies, hit that subscribe button. Comment where you're watching from. It's incredible how we're connected by curiosity about history's darkest secrets. The woman keeping score that night hadn't started as a willing participant in Borgia corruption. 10 years earlier, Lucrezia had been an innocent child, a pawn in her father's political games. The transformation from victim to accomplice would involve 3 marriages, 2 dead husbands, and lessons in survival that turned a naive girl into one of Renaissance Italy's most dangerous women. But understanding how Lucrezia became the woman at that orgy requires going back to the beginning, to the moment a Spanish cardinal seized the papacy and decided his daughter would be his most valuable asset. Lucrezia Borgia was born in 1480 to Rodrigo Borgia, a Spanish cardinal who would become Pope Alexander VI, and his longtime mistress, Vanosa de Catenghi. Illegitimate children of clergy weren't unusual in Renaissance Rome, but Rodrigo didn't hide his daughter. He acknowledged her, educated her, and planned to use her. By age 11, Lucrezia was already a political tool. Beautiful, charming, and refined, she was everything a Renaissance nobleman wanted in a wife. Rodrigo began negotiations for her marriage, viewing his daughter as a chess piece to create alliances that would strengthen Borgia power. Her education prepared her for this role. She learned Latin, Italian, and Spanish. She studied music, dance, and conversation skills that would make her attractive in aristocratic circles. She was taught to be pleasant, agreeable, and obedient, qualities that would make her useful for political marriages. But she was also learning darker lessons. She watched her father operate, saw how he manipulated rivals, how he used charm and violence interchangeably. She observed her brother Cesare, already showing signs of the brutality that would make him legendary. The Borgia household wasn't just a family, it was a training ground in power politics. When Rodrigo became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, 12-year-old Lucrezia suddenly became the Pope's daughter. Her value as a marriage prospect skyrocketed. Every ambitious Italian nobleman wanted an alliance with the papacy, and marriage to Lucrezia was the price of entry. She was engaged twice before age 13, each time to men her father later deemed politically inconvenient. The engagements were broken without consulting Lucrezia. She was learning her first lesson in Borgia family dynamics. She had no say in her own fate. Her first actual marriage came at age 13 to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. The match connected the Borgias to the powerful Sforza family of Milan. Lucrezia was a virgin bride, terrified, married to a man twice her age she barely knew, but this marriage wouldn't last. In Borgia calculations, alliances shifted constantly, and when Giovanni Sforza was no longer useful, Lucrezia would learn exactly how disposable Borgia marriages could be. For 3 years, Lucrezia lived as Lady of Pesaro with Giovanni Sforza. By all accounts, the marriage was reasonably stable. Giovanni was decent to her, and she performed her duties as an aristocratic wife. But in Rome, her father was recalculating political alliances. The Sforza connection was no longer valuable. Pope Alexander wanted an alliance with Naples instead. Giovanni Sforza was now an obstacle to new political opportunities. The solution was simple: dissolve the marriage. In 1497, Pope Alexander ordered Lucrezia to return to Rome. He announced her marriage would be annulled on grounds of non-consummation, claiming Giovanni was impotent and the marriage had never been physically completed. This was obviously false. Giovanni and Lucrezia had been married for 3 years and were known to have shared a bed. The impotence claim was a legal fiction designed to allow annulment, but it publicly humiliated Giovanni by declaring him unable to perform sexually. Giovanni fought the annulment, recognizing it as the insult it was. He proclaimed publicly that he had known her an infinite number of times, desperate to defend his masculine reputation. But arguing with the Pope was futile. Alexander simply declared the marriage invalid, and Giovanni had no power to resist. For Lucrezia, this episode taught crucial lessons. Her father would dissolve her marriages the moment they became politically inconvenient. Her own desires or attachments meant nothing. She was a tool to be deployed, withdrawn, and redeployed as Borgia interests required. But Giovanni's public protests created another problem. His claims about consummating the marriage contradicted the official papal narrative. Worse, rumors began circulating about why Alexander really wanted his daughter back in Rome. Whispers about inappropriate relationships between father and daughter that would haunt Lucrezia for years. The annulment was finalized in late 1497. At 17, Lucrezia was officially a virgin again by papal decree, available for a new political marriage. Her father was already negotiating with Alfonso of Aragon, illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This second marriage would teach Lucrezia even darker lessons about how the Borgia family operated and the price of being a pope's daughter. Alfonso of Aragon was different from Giovanni Sforza, young, handsome, and genuinely affectionate. He seemed to actually care for Lucrezia. Contemporary sources describe a marriage with real warmth, rare in political unions. For the first time, Lucrezia experienced something approaching happiness. They married in 1498 when Lucrezia was 18. Within a year, she was pregnant. In November 1499, she gave birth to a son, Rodrigo. For a brief period, Lucrezia had what she'd never known: a loving husband, a child, the possibility of a normal life. But politics were shifting again. The alliance with Naples was losing value as French forces advanced through Italy. Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia's brother, was building his own military power base with French support. Alfonso represented the old alliance that was now actively inconvenient. On July 15, 1500, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Multiple assailants stabbed him repeatedly before fleeing. He survived, badly wounded, and was carried to the Vatican for treatment. Lucrezia nursed him personally, barely leaving his bedside. For weeks, Alfonso slowly recovered. It seemed he might survive. But someone in the Vatican didn't want that. On August 18, exactly 1 month after the attack, Cesare Borgia entered Alfonso's sick room with armed men. He ordered everyone out, including Lucrezia. She was forced from the room while her brother remained alone with her wounded husband. Minutes later, Alfonso of Aragon was dead, strangled in his bed. The official story was that Alfonso had died from his wounds, but everyone knew the truth. Cesare had finished what the assassins started. Whether on direct orders from their father or his own initiative, Cesare had murdered Lucrezia's husband while she waited helplessly outside. This was Lucrezia's education in Borgia family values. Her happiness, her marriage, her husband's life, all were subordinate to family political interests, and Cesare, her beloved brother, had just murdered the man she loved. The question was, what would Lucrezia do about it? Lucrezia's reaction to Alfonso's murder revealed her transformation from victim to participant. She grieved Maintained. Contemporary sources describe her genuine devastation, but she didn't accuse Cesare publicly. She didn't break with her family. She accepted what had happened and moved forward. This acceptance marked a turning point. The naive girl who had been a pawn was learning to be a player. If she couldn't prevent violence, she would survive it by becoming indispensable to the family that perpetrated it. Her father recognized this shift. Within months of Alfonso's death, Pope Alexander began using Lucrezia in new ways, not just as a marriage prospect, but as an active political agent. He appointed her governor of Spoleto, giving her real administrative power. She proved surprisingly capable, handling civic matters with skill that impressed even skeptical observers. But her value to the family went beyond administration. Lucrezia was beautiful, charming, and now experienced in courtly politics. She could gather information at social events, identify potential allies or enemies, and report back to her father and brother. She became the Borgias' social intelligence network, and there were darker whispers. Stories began circulating about a ring Lucrezia wore, a hollow ring with a secret compartment. The rumors claimed it contained poison that could be released into wine with a subtle movement. Whether true or propaganda from Borgia enemies, the stories reflected a new perception. Lucrezia was no longer just a victim. She was potentially dangerous. Meanwhile, her father was negotiating yet another marriage. Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duke of Ferrara, would make Lucrezia a duchess and connect the Borgias to one of Italy's most respected ruling families. The d'Este family initially resisted marrying the Pope's daughter, meant association with Borgia scandal, but Pope Alexander offered massive financial inducements and made political threats. In early 1502, 21-year-old Lucrezia married Alfonso d'Este and became Duchess of Ferrara. This marriage would be her final one, and in Ferrara, away from direct papal control, Lucrezia would complete her transformation. Ferrara was different from Rome. The d'Este court valued learning, arts, and Renaissance culture. Lucrezia threw herself into this role, patronizing poets and artists, hosting intellectuals, creating salons where literature and philosophy were discussed. She was genuinely talented at this. Her letters show wit and intelligence. She corresponded with the greatest minds of the era. The court of Ferrara flourished under her patronage. To observers in Ferrara, Lucrezia seemed to be exactly what a Renaissance duchess should be: refined, cultured, pious, but connections to her family remained. When Pope Alexander died in 1503, allegedly from poison intended for a rival, Lucrezia mourned. When Cesare's military campaigns collapsed and he was imprisoned, she worked to secure his release. The bonds of family, forged through shared violence and scandal, didn't break just because she'd left Rome, and rumors followed her to Ferrara. Stories about the poison ring persisted. When enemies of the d'Este family died unexpectedly, whispers blamed Lucrezia. When rivals fell ill after dining with her, tongues wagged about Borgia methods. Modern historians debate these accusations. Were they true, or were they propaganda from families who hated the Borgias? The evidence is ambiguous. Inventories of her possessions do list a ring with secret opening, but whether it actually contained poison is unknown. What's clear is that Lucrezia's reputation as potentially dangerous served her interests. In a world where women had little direct power, being feared provided protection. If people believed she might poison them, they thought twice about threatening her. She also used more conventional forms of power. She bore several children to Alfonso d'Este, securing her position through motherhood. She managed estates efficiently, proving her administrative competence. She built networks of allies through her cultural patronage. By her mid-20s, Lucrezia had accomplished something remarkable. She'd escaped her family's direct control while maintaining useful connections. She'd built an independent power base in Ferrara. She'd survived 3 marriages, 2 dead husbands, and countless Borgia scandals. But questions about her past wouldn't disappear, especially the darkest accusation of all, the incest rumors involving her father and brother. The legend of Lucrezia's poison ring became one of Renaissance Italy's most persistent stories. According to the tales, she wore a hollow ring, beautiful to look at, deadly in function. A tiny hidden compartment held white powder. One subtle movement during a toast, and poison would drop into an enemy's wine. The ring allegedly contained cantarella, a poison the Borgias supposedly perfected. Symptoms mimicked natural illness: fever, stomach pain, gradual decline. Death came days later, long enough after the dinner that connection was hard to prove. Contemporary enemies of the Borgias described this poison in detail. They claimed the Borgias poisoned rivals systematically, accumulating power by eliminating opposition while maintaining plausible deniability about cause of death. Did Lucrezia actually use such a ring? The evidence is contradictory. After her death, estate inventories did list jewelry including a ring with secret opening for powders. This confirms hollow rings existed in her possession. Whether they contained poison is speculation. Some historians argue the poison ring was pure propaganda, enemy fabrication to demonize the Borgias. Others point to the suspiciously high death rate among Borgia opponents and suggest some truth behind the legends. What's undeniable is the power of the reputation itself. Whether or not Lucrezia actually poisoned anyone, the belief that she might acted as protection. Enemies thought twice before threatening her. Rivals approached carefully. The possibility of danger provided security that legal protections couldn't. The ring also represented Lucrezia's transformation symbolically. At 11, she'd been powerless. At 13, she'd been married against her will. At 17, her marriage had been annulled without consultation. At 19, her husband had been murdered by her brother. But by her 20s, she'd acquired her own weapons: intelligence gathering, political networks, cultural influence through patronage, and allegedly literal poison that could eliminate threats while she smiled and made pleasant conversation. Real or rumored, the poison ring represented what Lucrezia had become: no longer a victim, but a woman who could defend herself in a world where women rarely held such power. Understanding Lucrezia requires understanding the family system she inhabited. The Borgias operated the Vatican like a criminal enterprise, with clear roles for each family member. Pope Alexander VI was the mastermind, using papal authority to make deals, eliminate opponents through excommunication, and accumulate wealth through selling church offices. He weaponized religion for family advancement. Sayer Borgia was enforcement, personally strangling enemies, leading military campaigns to conquer territory, and instilling fear through spectacular violence. He became the model for Machiavelli's The Prince. And Lucrezia, she was intelligence, diplomacy, and social engineering. Her beauty opened doors, her charm disarmed suspicion, her marriages created alliances, her social events gathered information, and allegedly, her poison eliminated obstacles her father and brother couldn't touch openly. Together, they transformed the papacy from religious office to family business. Positions were sold to the highest bidder. Cardinals were appointed based on bribes rather than merit. Papal bulls were issued to legitimize Borgia territorial claims. The spiritual authority of Christianity became a tool for accumulating temporal power. This required no shame about traditional Christian morality. The family hosted orgies in the Vatican. They openly acknowledged illegitimate children. They murdered rivals without pretense of legal process. They accumulated wealth that would make modern billionaires envious. But the system required all three working together. Alexander's papal authority was useless without Caesare's military force and Lucrezia's social connections. Caesare's violence needed Alexander's legitimization and Lucrezia's intelligence about who to target. Lucrezia's influence required her father's position and her brother's protection. When Pope Alexander died in 1503, the machine began to break down. Caesare's power base collapsed without papal backing. Lucrezia in Ferrara was isolated from direct family support. The Borgia moment was ending, but Lucrezia had learned the family business well enough to survive independently. The skills she developed, manipulation, intelligence gathering, maintaining useful alliances, served her in Ferrara just as they'd served the family in Rome. The darkest accusations against Lucretia involved incest, claims she had sexual relationships with both her father, Pope Alexander, and her brother Cesare. These rumors circulated widely during her lifetime and have fascinated historians ever since. The accusations came from multiple sources. Giovanni Sforza, her first husband, publicly claimed after their annulment that Alexander wanted Lucretia back in Rome for his own sexual purposes. He called the Pope a man who uses his own daughter as a concubine. Enemies of the Borgias spread similar claims. They described a family where normal boundaries didn't exist, where father, daughter, and son engaged in relationships that violated every Christian and natural law. Some contemporary sources suggested Lucretia bore a child whose paternity was deliberately obscured, either her father's or brother's, hidden through elaborate legal fictions about who the mother actually was. Modern historians debate these accusations intensely. Some argue they were pure propaganda by Borgia enemies, recognizing that incest accusations were standard political weapons in Renaissance Italy, used to demonize rivals regardless of truth. Others point to suspicious details that suggest something inappropriate occurred. The unusual closeness between Lucretia and her father, the fact that Alexander kept her in Rome rather than allowing her to live with her first husband, the mysterious child whose parentage was never clearly established. The truth is probably unknowable. The Borgias kept certain things secret, even from their own record keepers, and their enemies had every reason to invent or exaggerate sexual scandal. What's clear is that normal family boundaries were weak in the Borgia household. They operated by different rules than other families, openly violating standards others pretended to maintain. Whether this extended to incest remains uncertain, but the very fact that such accusations were plausible says something about how the Borgias were perceived. For Lucrezia, these rumors were devastating. They followed her to Ferrara, tainted her children with implications about their ancestry, and undermined her attempts to build respectable life separate from Borgia scandal. The strongest evidence about Lucrezia's life comes from primary sources: letters, diaries, official documents that survived the Renaissance. Johannes Burchard's diary provided the Vatican orgy description that opened this story. As Master of Ceremonies, Burchard documented papal events. His entry about the ballet of chestnuts is detailed, specific, and written without obvious bias, just clinical description of what he witnessed. Burchard had no reason to fabricate. His job was documenting events, and lying in an official diary would risk his position. The fact that he recorded the orgy matter-of-factly suggests such events weren't unusual enough to shock him anymore. Letters between Italian nobles contain references to Lucrezia's alleged poison ring and her reputation for danger. While enemy propaganda might exaggerate, the consistency of these references across multiple independent sources suggests some basis in reality. Machiavelli, who met the Borgias personally, wrote about them with a mixture of fascination and horror. His letters describe Lucrezia as intelligent and capable, but also deeply enmeshed in family corruption. His observations carry weight because he was a sophisticated political analyst, not prone to believing baseless rumors. Papal records show the financial transactions around Lucrezia's marriages, massive dowries, political payments, the economics of trading the Pope's daughter for alliances. These documents confirm she was treated as a commodity, valued for her marriage potential rather than her personhood. Legal documents from the Ferrara court show Lucrezia managing estates, making administrative decisions, and wielding real power. These records demonstrate her competence and intelligence, contradicting simplistic portrayals of her as merely a victim or merely a villain. Estate inventories after her death listed her possessions, including the famous ring with secret opening. This confirms at least that such a ring existed, whatever its actual purpose. Together, these sources paint a complex picture. A woman who was victimized by her family's ambitions, but also became an active participant in their schemes, who developed real capabilities while also being complicit in corruption, who was both more innocent than enemies claimed and more culpable than defenders admit. By her final years, Lucrezia had accomplished something remarkable. She'd survived. In a world where being a Borgia was often a death sentence, where her family's enemies wanted revenge, where her own relatives had murdered her husband, she'd built a stable, even respected life in Ferrara. She bore multiple children to Alfonso d'Este, securing her position through motherhood. She managed the duchy competently during her husband's absences. She maintained correspondence with intellectuals across Europe. To many contemporaries, she seemed to have transcended her scandalous origins, but she never escaped her past completely. References to the Borgias always carried implications. Her children grew up knowing their maternal grandfather had been a corrupt pope, their uncle a murderer. The rumors about poison and incest followed her family for generations. Lucrezia's health declined in her 30s. Multiple pregnancies had taken their toll. In June 1519, she gave birth to a stillborn child and never recovered. She died on June 24, 1519, at age 39 from complications of childbirth. Her death was conventional. Dying in childbirth was tragically common for Renaissance women. After a life defined by scandal, manipulation, and political intrigue, she died in the most ordinary way a woman of her era could. Alfonso d'Este mourned genuinely. Despite the political origins of their marriage, they developed real partnership. Her children grieved. The court of Ferrara recognized they'd lost a capable and cultivated duchess. But elsewhere in Italy, reactions were mixed. Some saw her death as ending the Borgia era finally and completely. Others remembered her as a victim who'd survived impossible circumstances with intelligence and adaptability. Still others viewed her as equally guilty as her father and brother, complicit in all their crimes. The truth was probably all of these. Lucrezia was victim and participant, innocent and guilty, forced into corruption, and willing embracer of it. She'd been shaped by her family's ambitions, but also made choices that perpetuated their methods. The ruins of Borgia palaces still stand in Rome and Ferrara. Tourists visit them, learning about Renaissance art and culture. The dark realities of what happened in these spaces, the political murders, the orgies, the systematic corruption, are usually glossed over in favor of celebrating Renaissance achievements. Lucrezia Borgia's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, gender, and complicity. She began as a victim an 11-year-old girl used as a political pawn, married against her will, divorced when convenient, widowed when her husband became inconvenient. But victimhood doesn't absolve her of later choices. As she gained understanding of how the Borgia system worked, she became an active participant. Whether she actually used poison is debatable. Whether she gathered intelligence, facilitated alliances, and benefited from her family's crimes is not. Her story reveals the impossible choices women faced in Renaissance Italy. Direct power was unavailable. No woman could be pope or general, but indirect power through family connections was possible if you were willing to pay the moral price. Lucrezia chose survival and influence over powerless virtue. The Vatican orgy where she kept score wasn't the beginning of her corruption, it was a symbol of how completely she'd been absorbed into Borgia methods. The girl who'd been forced into her first marriage had become the woman who refereed sex competitions in the papal palace. Yet she also showed remarkable capability. Her governance of Spoleto was effective. Her cultural patronage in Ferrara was genuine. Her intelligence and charm were real talents, not just tools of manipulation. She could have achieved much in a world that gave women legitimate paths to power. Instead, she became the Pope's daughter, who allegedly carried poison in a ring, who survived 3 marriages and 2 dead husbands, who transformed from victim to accomplice in one of history's most corrupt families. If this journey into Renaissance corruption moved you, share this video. Subscribe for more hidden truths about history's most fascinating and morally complex figures. And remember, understanding Lucrezia Borgia means recognizing that victims can become perpetrators, that survival sometimes requires compromise with evil, and that power corrupts regardless of gender. The frescoes in Ferrara still bear her image, beautiful, serene, duchess and patron of arts, but behind that painted smile was a woman who'd learned the hardest lessons about power, survival, and the price of being born a Borgia.